Hey everyone, and welcome to this Talking Insomnia episode in which Luke is guesting. Welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks so much for coming on, Luke, and just tell us a little bit about what's been happening and how you connected with me as well.
Yeah, my sleeping issues, I would say, you know, it's tough to kind of pinpoint exactly where it kind of started, but I'd say roughly like the inklings of it started like last year, maybe a year and a half ago. I had just started going to college. And I'd never been an amazing sleeper, mind you, but it wasn't too bad. But I think just the shift caused some, a bit more disturbances and a bit more noticing it. And
Hmm.
then I remember, I think a prime kind of time where it kind of came to mind and was like more of an issue was I had an exam. And then before that exam, I just could not really kind of get down to sleep. And you know, it was one of those ones where I think a lot of people feel this, where it's like you knew sometimes you'd have some trouble sleeping, but you didn't know it could get this much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was. It wasn't horrible, but I fell asleep around 4 or 5, which was foreign to me. Um, and then yeah, the day was okay. Like I was fine. I completed things, but it just kind of, from then on, I feel like you're thinking about it. You know what I mean?
It
That
was
could
on the
happen again.
radar. Yeah.
Yeah, it was on the radar. And for a long time, it wasn't too bad. I started taking melatonin at some point around then, just because I was already having a bit of trouble there. It was just different environment. So I was taking melatonin. I
And
think
sorry to interrupt you, Luke, but
no problem.
just so I have an idea, like timeline, when was this?
So this was, I guess, like the end of 2018, beginning of 2019.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. But to be honest, so things were iffy in college, and so I should say, based on my knowledge now, a big issue I had in college was I did not I my structure in terms of like waking up, going to bed at the same time was not great, you know. Um I think because my classes were late, I didn't set an alarm a lot of the time, which I think was already setting things a bit out of whack. But I didn't know anything about how how a rise time and stuff and how that consistency is kind of beneficial. I think a lot of times we just have to in our lives, so we don't really think about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so things were already out of whack. I would wake up at different times a lot of the day. Um, and things, to be honest, then at the end of that year, things were okay. They weren't great, but then I got a job, a summer job, a 4-month position where, I had to get up early, kind of same time every day. It was like a 9 to 5 type thing. I'd get up around 10 to 7. And things honestly like really cleaned themselves up this summer, that last summer,
Yeah,
and it was
yeah,
great. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
it honestly, in a lot of ways, it resolved itself just naturally, which is great. But then it kind of flipped back around when I went back to school, and then I was actually on a co-op term these last 4 months, January to May or April. And what happened was, I think things were getting kind of bad again in school, and I had a really bad a night again, another kind of anticipatory thing before an exam that was even worse. And then I think in my head I was like, okay, this is getting kind of bad and stuff, and I'm getting pretty alarmed. But I think I was hoping that it would clean itself up again, kind of how it had before. Just, you have a couple rough nights at the beginning because you're getting up early, but then it kind of just, your schedule sets itself. But I never quite got back on track, and that's when things got really bad, and I kind of started having just consistently rough nights
Yeah.
while going to work these last 4 months. So that kind of took me to where I like started doing CBTI. And yeah, so I've been doing it basically now for about 3 or 4 months, and things have gotten better in some ways, but I find I I'm kind of stuck in a sense that I don't really feel good about it. I'm still thinking about it and worrying, and I'm still having like things aren't really consistent. You know what I mean? Like I haven't
Yeah,
been able to. I've had some great nights and stuff, and like a lot of times I'll have good nights, but then I have like some really bad ones, and it feels like it's not really resolving how I would hope. You know?
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment.
So, just to get the timeline clear again, like,
Mhm.
you went back to college around January, and then you kind of started having trouble sleeping again. There was that exam again, and things kind of escalated. And
Mhm.
then, at some point, you started working again. Is that correct?
Yeah. So actually, the time's just a bit different. I went back to school in September 2019
Oh yeah,
for a 4-month term, and then things started going off the rails. A big factor for that was I should clarify one thing, because again, I never really thought about how schedule applies to sleep and that kind of thing as much as I should have. So I was sleeping well and getting up early in the summer, so I took a class that was in the morning, 8:30, right?
yeah.
But that was only 2 times a week, so that was the only 2 times I'd wake
Okay,
up.
okay.
And as you can imagine, that wasn't swell. That wasn't great. That's when I started having trouble, and then I had an exam in that class, and that was the one that was really bad. Like I slept like an hour and a half before, and it
Yeah,
was
yeah,
just
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
terrible, you know. And then that's when it started to become like a real thing again, you know.
And when did you leave college to start working again?
That would be January. So like I finished the term in December, and then I
Mm-hmm.
had a work term, which is just 4 months of work in January to April.
Oh, okay. And then January through April, was
Mhm.
there an obligation to get up at a certain time?
There was, yeah. So it was kind of like again, kind of very similar to my first job. I'd be getting up at 7 every day.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah. And that's kind of where it got really messy.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And then at some point, I'm guessing now, like 3, 4 months ago, that's when did you find my channel and start learning or something like that?
So I had no idea about your channel until maybe like a month ago. But
Okay.
I did CBTI through a therapist, and I did it for a long time, and it was the type of thing where like, I once COVID started, honestly. So I was doing it kind of, but I was still kind of scared, and like the whole thing about going to bed later was like very concerning for me because I had obligations. But once COVID started, I actually started working from home,
Mm.
so I kind of got a lot more gung ho with it, right? And I was really kind of dedicated to it, you know. Like I was doing stimulus control like all night for the first couple of nights, that kind of thing, um, and kind of really working at it. But I think the problem with it was I wasn't really, what helped with your channel and that kind of thing was I wasn't fully informed or aware of how progression and how recovery looks, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I kind of expected, you know, you get the bad nights, and they get a little bit better, then they get a little bit better, and then they kind of just stay good. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes.
And then so things would get pretty good, and I was feeling really confident, and then a couple worse nights and then some really bad ones would just throw it all off, and I'd be like, okay, well, this isn't working. And then I was just kind of in this bad cycle of misunderstanding kind of how it worked, and then like, you know, it was
Yep,
just kind of
yep.
very confusing at that point. At that point I didn't know, like, because before this I would say like when my sleeping was quote unquote good, I was always the type of person that it was just, I always took around maybe like an hour to an hour and a half to fall asleep. Like it wasn't ideal, but that just how it'd been my whole life.
Mm.
So I didn't
Okay.
really think anything of it.
Yeah.
um but now it's different in that, like, you know, when you're getting into the later kind of realm, I start thinking about it a lot heavier, and then you get the anxiety about it, you know what I mean?
Yes, yes.
And it's tough to combat that because, like, you know, like I know not every night you can fall asleep really quick or immediately, but then it's like part of me wishes I could just go back to that feeling of like being okay that was like an hour, you know what I mean? Because I was just thinking about stuff, you know, planning my next day, that kind of thing, and it was pretty good.
Yep, yep.
But now there's this stuck, I'm kind of like stuck, you know.
Totally get it. Totally get
Yeah.
it. And I wanted to ask you, I'm personally curious, and I think a lot of people who hear this will will want to, would find value in hearing this as well. But in your like experience with the CBTI, what do you feel like? What did you learn, take away from that, and what was helpful and not so helpful about that?
So some of the helpful things I'd say was it taught me the biggest thing was it taught me what it felt like to feel sleepy. Because personally, I never really knew what that was.
Mm-hmm.
Like I never really understood, I don't think, the idea of like your eyes shutting and that kind of thing. I was always the kind of person that just like you go to bed at a decent time and you expect the kind of thinking and then eventually you just fall asleep. You know what I
I
mean?
see. Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, so CBTI taught me what it felt like to feel good and sleepy. Um, I think the thing that is rough about it was the whole stimulus control in the 2020 minute, that kind of thing, or the 30/30, whatever. Um, that makes you start looking at sleep differently, and then you start getting frustrated quickly, or you know what I mean. So
Exactly. Yep.
that's the part that I think was a little rough for me, and that I was not a fan of for sure. Like it worked; it was really helpful at the beginning, like to kind of hype up my sleep drive or whatever. But now I'm at a point where it's like I know I can get sleepy and I know what it feels like, but now it just kind of it's frustrating and it makes the experience of going to bed not that fun
Yeah.
if you have to be getting up and that kind of thing. And it just becomes like a real, especially like I know, like I'm sure a lot of people kind of that are in your channel know that's like after a certain point you're like how long am I gonna have to do this, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think that you just pinpoint one of the main problems, I think, with like traditional CBTI, which is all these rules and like focus on them, which can like, often take you in the wrong direction. But anyway, we can talk more about that later. But uh, going back to like, let's say, 2017 or like before this all started,
Mhm.
at that point, you didn't really consider yourself having too much trouble sleeping. It took you quite a long time to fall asleep, but you didn't really perceive that as much of a problem. And back then, would you go to bed, like would you like this, did you just have like a I'm going to bed at this time, that's how you determined when to go to bed?
Yeah, I think like, on school nights, it was a pretty standard thing. It would be like 11 o'clock, I'd go to bed,
Hmm.
usually. And then on weekends, I did whatever I felt like, and it
Okay,
worked
got it.
out. Yeah. But even I was always the person that I took a while. Like even if I was out with my friends and I was up till like 3 or 4, it was still going to be an hour. I usually
Mm,
knew that. And that was fine.
exactly, and that was fine. And that like that hour,
Mhm.
um what did you usually do that hour?
I usually just thought about my day, like my whatever, maybe conversations I had, maybe some work I had the next day. I know a big thing I would do is like, let's say I had a test tomorrow, you kind of like almost quizzing yourself a bit in bed. And I found that kind of helped me kind of consolidate some of the
Hmm.
work, that kind of thing. But really just whatever I felt like. I really liked it was kind of my period to just like think about things.
So in a way, you could look at it as that was kind of like unwinding for you. Although you were already in bed, you were kind of like just, thinking about stuff. And it was, I'm guessing it sounds like, if not pleasant, then at least neutral.
Yeah, it was just kind of how it was. It
Yep.
was very neutral,
Yep.
definitely.
Very good. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I think the question I have for you is like, do you have a good sense of like, if I were to ask you, why do you think all that stuff happened? Like, why do you think you have trouble sleeping now? Like the sequence of events, like from starting from your sleep schedule get kind of out of whack, you
Mhm.
started having trouble sleeping, it got better when you had that first job, you got back to school, etc. Like how do you explain, or how do you think of that sequence of events?
Mm. I think a key thing that I haven't mentioned yet is um, somewhere along the lines of that first year of school, I started thinking about hours, which as like how many hours of sleep I was getting.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that became really troublesome, and that like I started doing all this mental math. Like I had never even thought about it before. Like, like if I was still up at 12:30 and I had to get up at 7, or I was up at 1, I had to get up at 7. I didn't even think about hours before university. But all of a
Yes.
sudden, for some reason, because I had more time to sleep, I started thinking like, I was taking a while, but I still have like enough time to get 8 hours. You know what I mean? Or I'm taking like an hour and a half, but yeah, I don't have to get up until 9:30. So I started doing all these kind of mental gymnastics, with the numbers, even though naturally for most of my life it's usually been somewhere between 6 and 7, and I didn't even know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Which that became a really troublesome thing, and that's something I've had a hard time shaking. And I was able to. That's another thing where it's like I knew that would be bad for me in on that job in the summer, so I almost like I had this goodwill where I just like if that thought started to crop up, it would like I could disperse it pretty easily and just get back to my own thing, and it was pretty good, you know. But I
Yes.
think it just things got a little more hectic. Things got a little more hectic when the second job. I think there was a little more at stake. There was a little more trouble, which made the anxiety kind of higher, and it was a little harder to shake those thoughts.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That I'm sure that played a role as well. Let me, you know, as you were talking, I was thinking of kind of creating a narrative in my mind. Let me share it with you, and I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on it. So I think you mentioned early on that you didn't realize how important it was to have some consistency in terms of like your sleep schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And I I think it's important to note that there are people out there who have absolutely zero consistency, like completely erratic sleep
Yeah.
times, and they have no problem with it whatsoever. It's like they're happy. So it doesn't, you know, it doesn't have like it's not important for everyone to have a certain routine or whatnot. But here's what I think is interesting, and this I think something very similar to maybe what happened to you came up in a different uh, episode where I talked to somebody who had trouble sleeping like this, and that was that if you have this schedule where you're maybe you tend to drift later, you're in college, you have no obligation in the morning, you start drifting later and later, you start to get up at 9 or 10 or whatnot, but then for some reason there's one night where it's somewhat important that you get to sleep, and then you decide, okay, I'm going to go to bed at 10 or 11 because tomorrow is something that's important. Well, then your whole circadian rhythm has shifted, so there's no
Mm-hmm.
way you're going to be able to sleep at 11 because your whole circadian rhythm has shifted. And then what happens is that you don't fall asleep for like 5 hours,
Right.
and then
Oh,
it's like, whoa, this is odd.
yeah.
Does that sound like something that
That
may happen?
that's totally. I really feel that's exactly what happened. I think because for me, it was normal to take a long time. So for me, usually it was always this type of thing where it's like, no matter around the time, I'll usually just, take a little longer, and that's fine. But it was when it kind of like, then you're like, oh, this is really long. Like I didn't know this could happen. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's when it was like, okay, this could happen again, type thing. And then you
Exactly. I think that's totally when like sleep was to some degree from then on, like on the radar. And
totally.
even though you went through periods where you slept better, it was kind of always there lingering in the back of the mind, like that, the brain's like, safety mechanism, the amygdala, whatever you want to call it, was
Hmm.
like, okay, sleep can be a problem. Like it's kind of looking out for it. So I think that's the root of everything. That's the kind of like the work is always about like becoming kind of completely calming down that safety center and like completely getting sleep off the radar. But anyway, we'll talk more about that later. So, and then
Hmm.
continuing the kind of narrative there, I was thinking, so, you were kind of not sleeping that well, but then you had that summer job where you had to get up in the morning,
Yeah.
and that regularized things. So you were doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Sleep was still kind of on the radar, but you were doing well. You went back to college, and then you already probably had this like, I wonder what's going to happen. I guess if my sleep, you kind of already had that, what do you call it, anticipation that things can get out of whack,
Yeah.
and then they did. So it kind of became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and actually, it was actually worse this time because of
Definitely.
all that had happened. And now here's another interesting part is that when you then went back to having a more regular job, then
Mhm.
it wouldn't surprise me at all if at some level of your consciousness, it was like, okay, this is good. Now I'm going to have to get up 7 o'clock or whatever every morning. So
Mhm.
things are probably going to get better, but I'm not sure, but hopefully they will. And now there was this kind of expectation that
Right.
things would settle down, and that kind of backfired. And now here we are.
I think so, for sure. I think it was like, I just kind of assumed like, okay, this is kind of my chance to, and it was like not even like in the back of my conscious. I think I was pretty aware that like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I knew that it helped a lot the first time. I was like, I'm sure maybe the first couple nights might be kind of bad, but I'll get it back on track now. Like this is my time to kind of just reset the clock, that kind of thing. And yeah, and it just couldn't get there.
I hear, it's very similar to another story here often, which is somebody says, I had trouble sleeping, then I did CBTI and I was fine. And then I had trouble sleeping again. And then I tried CBTI, but this time it didn't work.
Mm,
And whenever I hear that story, I'm like, my thought becomes like, the teaching wasn't good enough. If it was
yeah,
my client, I feel bad. I'm like, dang it, I didn't educate this person well enough, because if this person had completely understood CBTI or my teaching or whatever it is, then they wouldn't have approached it that way. Because whenever you approach CBTI as like, okay, this is going to work now, this is going to solve it, this is going to make me sleep. No, it's not working. Then it means you haven't understood the core of it, that the more you try, the less you sleep. So whenever you
yeah.
approach anything with that the goal of sleeping more, like it will not work.
I think and what I've noticed with CBTI is like, I think unfortunately a lot of the people providing it kind of look at it a little bit like that, or at least don't clarify, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. Like because I had two kind of big resources, which was like my therapist, who she was very nice and stuff, but I felt a little, because I'm kind of the type of person that likes to know what's going on, especially if it's
Mm-hmm.
something so that I'm so personally invested in. But it was more of a hands-off approach, kind of like do this, do that type of thing, and then come back, that kind of thing. And then also I had this book that gave me kind of false expectations, I think, of what to expect from CBTI, because it tells you like, you'll do this, it's going to be rough for probably about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, then around 4 and 5 it gets good and it kind of stays consistent.
Right, right.
So then you have those expectations. I'm like, the first couple of weeks I was like, oh, this is horrible, but I know like it's going to get better. And then it did get better. I'm like, this is good and stuff, but then it got worse again. I'm like, is this supposed to happen, that kind of thing? And I
Yeah,
didn't really know, like, yeah.
totally. By the way, what book was that? Was it Say Goodnight to Insomnia?
It was not. It was okay. This is funny. It's this really old book that my grandmother had because she has trouble
No.
sleeping.
Really?
Yeah, it was from like 97 or something,
Oh, okay,
which I
okay.
should have known better anyways. But I think a big thing was yeah, I don't know. Like I just saw it there and I was like, I'll read it and see what they. And yeah, it's called No More Sleepless Nights.
Oh, interesting. I think
It's
I've heard of
by
it.
a guy
Okay.
from the Mayo Clinic.
Okay, okay. Cool, cool.
Yeah. So again, it just gave me the wrong expectations, and it didn't even like. It looked as like sleep restriction and stimulus control is like two completely different things. You know what I mean? It was,
Yeah,
now that I know more, but at the time I just don't know what's going on. That's the big thing. You're just kind of desperate to try to figure it out.
absolutely.
And a
And
big thing again is the reason I didn't know about your channel for so long, Daniel, is I'm sure me, like probably a lot of people who eventually find your channel, is the first time you look up something about sleep or insomnia, usually it's a lot worse. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
And so
totally.
I saw like
Absolutely.
some pretty scary stuff. I know a big one. I saw you were pretty against it. I saw something by that guy that did that book,
Oh my God, Matt Walker. Yeah.
not Walker, but basically it's just like, hey, insomnia is bad, and yeah, you should be scared. And then you're like, oh God. So I saw like half of one of those videos. I was like, okay, I'm never looking this up on YouTube again. So that was a big reason. I really just had no idea about you or like Martin Reed. So I just kind of stayed away, and I was like, it's probably safer for me just to try to do this outside of that kind of sphere.
Absolutely. I want to share this thought I had. I kind of, I kind of one of those thoughts that kind of crystallized for me yesterday, which was, it'll be a quick detour, but I think it will be helpful. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know how we use like statins, like these, medicines that lower your the fats that are in or your blood,
Mm-hmm.
and they were developed because of this narrative that if fat is floating around in your blood system, that can clog up your blood vessels and you can have a heart attack. So we have to lower them. And lo and behold, statins worked. Everybody's happy. But then later on, people realized that the cardioprotective effect actually had nothing to do with how they lowered blood fats. It was like a big shock. It was like, oh, really? It has nothing to do with that. So they work with some other mechanism, very interesting. But that, bringing that to CBTI, I honestly believe that sleep restriction, for anybody who's new to the channel, like just basically spending less time in bed, was kind of theorized to work because you kind of force yourself to stay up late, and then you build this need for sleep, and then that kind of helps you sleep better. But I think actually that's not how it works. I think it works by, the core of sleep is like, or the problems with sleeping is that the more you try to sleep, the less you get. And I think sleep restriction worked by being a psychological step away from trying to sleep. It had nothing to do, actually, or little to do with like building sleep drive. It's more to do with like, oh, it's a psychological step away from sleeping. I'm kind of moving in the complete opposite direction. And that's how it helps people. So I think that's why there's so much confusion. Like a lot of therapists are like all about like, oh, we're going to calculate your sleep efficiency. Oh, you're still sleeping that much. We're going to spend less time in bed. Now we're going to spend more time in bed, which is actually just confusing. So I think, there's that parallel there.
Yeah, I agree. I think, because I think a big thing to permanently not have sleep trouble is like, it's not going to be your sleep drive being built up for the next 2 or 3 weeks, you kind of have to understand that and really get it, really feel that, you know what I mean? Because you can say it, but it's hard to kind of really feel that, like, you shouldn't be trying when you're just kind of used to it.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
100%. So lately here, like, what are you doing on a practical, like you're trying to get up about the same time and you're trying to go to bed not too early, or what are you doing?
Yeah. So, I've been kind of just following now a pretty decently, I guess, largest window. Like, right now I'm around 12 to 7:30, which has been pretty effective for me, a lot of the time. I kind of bounced around again a lot because I didn't really, that was my, as I started to do well, that was my sleep window, and I started to fill it and get pretty good. Then it started to get bad again, and I was like, oh, okay, like maybe this is too big, and I started to get into that problem solving again, which I
Yeah.
didn't know any better, so I was like, oh, people have been doing really well by really shortening it first and then slowly building it up again. Maybe I did it wrong, keeping it big. And now with my understanding kind of everything, I was like, no, like that was working for me. And that was just because I was like letting go. So I'm just going to kind of go back to that. And I've been a bit looser with everything, just in that, I don't like rush to do stimulus control, that kind of thing. It's more like, I think I've mentioned it to you in like emails that I'll watch some TV in bed before I go to sleep. And then sometimes if I'm having trouble, I'll pull out the phone a bit more and watch a bit more. And then sometimes just if I'm really not feeling that good in bed, I'll get out. But getting out, I'm not the hugest fan of anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing, kind of roughly.
Sounds good. Is it like if you get out of bed, you kind of get more frustrated and is that why
Yeah,
you don't like that?
sometimes, like, I think there's a lot of bad memories with getting out of bed now.
Exactly. Right.
Is
Right.
that there's like the whole thing that it's just like, yeah, like if I'm not feeling that great outside of bed and I'm waiting and stuff and it's just not really working out, like, I don't
Sure.
know,
Yeah,
it
no,
just
it makes total sense to me. And I'm sure you heard me say, I don't think there's any problem whatsoever in staying in your bed as long as you're, doing something that's neutral or positive or like, keeps you from just like lying there trying to sleep. It's all good.
yeah, I think that was the thing, like, honest, like my bed became kind of this almost like freaky thing, you know what I mean? Like, oh, don't get near it until it's bedtime, that type of thing.
Exactly.
You know what I
Exactly.
mean? It was such a thing. Like, me and my girlfriend would watch TV on the couch, on a really small couch next to my bed before going to sleep. You know what I mean? It was just
Yeah.
like kind of, it felt a little, I was like, is this really how it has to be for me just because I have trouble sleeping, that kind of thing. I was like, this seems a little excessive, but yeah. So I kind of lined up on that. I was like, this is a little silly.
Very good. And I think, yeah, I mean, given that you've only found my channel like a few weeks ago and you've already made that big realization that when you try to like adjust your sleep window, depending on what happens, that's that just you end up chasing your tail. In fact, I think the whole thing with the sleep one is that it should be so wide that it's like you could do this forever, which
Definitely.
you're doing, like you so I think that's really, really good. And one thing I was thinking about was, like, I know you mentioned that kind of calculating hours was,
Yeah,
you identified that as a big issue, which I think it totally is.
totally.
And are you doing less of that? Or are you like avoiding to look at the time, or how's that going?
So that's the thing. That's something that's been hard to shake in a lot of ways because I'm pretty good with the clock. I have a whole system now where I can pretty much use my phone without seeing the clock, which is pretty great. For me, the problem is I still can mentally do it in my subconscious, you know what I mean, without even realizing it.
Okay.
You go to bed around, I would hop in bed maybe 11:20, not really be thinking about it. But then let's say like, oh, you've watched this much of the show, and then
Right.
and it's just such a pain in the butt. It's a really like I feel like if I that would be the one thing that I think if I could somehow erase that, like discovering time and stuff in bed, that would completely change everything. Because that's how it was before. Like I wasn't a great sleeper, but I never thought about how many hours I got.
Yeah, exactly.
You just get up and you kind of do your thing. And even to be honest, I knew I wasn't a good sleeper and I was tired sometimes, but it was like kind of like one of those things that was just like an acceptance thing for most of my life. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it wasn't too bad, like a lot of people have a bit of trouble sleeping. It was just kind of one of those things. But then it became a threat, like you say, and then it's like even my old schedule wasn't good enough, you get kind of twisted.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I want to follow up on that one, but
Mhm.
before I do, I don't want to forget to
Yeah.
mention this, that I think many times saying like just don't watch the clock is very practical and helps a lot of people. They just stop doing that and they feel more free and etc. That's great. But as you know the thing with sleep efforts is that they're sneaky. Everything can become a sleep effort. So and by the way, anyone who's new here, sleep effort is anything you do to kind of like try to make yourself sleep more. That effort in that always makes the opposite happen. You sleep less. So if you're doing, like, if you're very actively trying not to know the time and you're trying very actively to not calculate the time in your head, then the opposite happens. You kind of brings more attention to it. So it's
Yeah.
almost like, I want to say, you try that and it kind of like became an effort, just like not knowing the time became such an effort that it may be actually counterproductive at this point.
Yeah, like it's something I'm trying to be more just hands off with in general, because I know it's like for me, I think a big learning point and a big thing that you've kind of helped me push is like I don't really try to push anything, like not
Good.
doing
Yes,
something, doing
yes.
something. It's just like I kind of in my knowledge, I'm like, I know it's probably good to focus away from the clock. If it happens, it happens. Like, like yesterday, I kind of knew around, I kind of roughly know around how many hours I get, but I tried just like, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to just kind of do your
Exactly.
best. And I just try to like do other stuff.
And let me ask you this then. Like, in the past couple of weeks here, you've been, I think, learning a lot of very important things. Like,
Yeah.
do you find yourself being less worried and things are trending in the right direction, or not really? You mentioned you do feel kind of stuck, but is that like stuck as in, yeah, tell me more about that.
Yeah. So I kind of still do in that, like, it feels like emotionally, I don't feel less worried a lot of the time. In that,
Mm-hmm,
like,
mm-hmm.
when you have I'm still having those bad nights and that kind of bothers me, that kind of thing. Like, it's like, I can tell myself like, I know there's going to be setbacks and stuff, but it doesn't make them any less like,
Mm-hmm.
of a kind of hit to the self-esteem. Um, and I think it's just the big thing for me that's kind of been bothering me a lot is like, it just kind of felt like after the first couple of weeks of CBTI, it's just been very steady. You know what I mean? There'll be some good nights for a while, then it kind of goes back for a bit. Then it's like good for a bit and it goes back. And it's just been like, I thought at this point, I was hoping that it would kind of at least be relatively steady and I'd feel relatively okay about going to bed, but it still feels like such a threat every night.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Like
Exactly.
for instance, like to be honest, I've had the last 3 nights have been really good. They've been really good, but I know like last night I was still worried about it, and I'm sure the nights before I was, and tonight, as much as I want to tell myself I won't be, you never know. So yeah,
Exactly.
it's tricky.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of summarize what you just, or yeah, I don't know if summarize is the right word, but to comment on what you just said, it's,
Mhm.
I mean, you're doing okay. You have some good nights and some nights where you sleep a little, etc. But you're still attached to the outcome. You're still attached.
Yeah, totally.
You still think of, it's better to sleep more. Which, I mean, everybody thinks that way, like, but you're more attached to it. Like it emotionally affects you if you
Yeah,
don't sleep well, and also the overall, you're also emotionally attached to progress. You would like to see more progress. You would like to get better, and that
yeah.
attachment ultimately is what's in your way.
Hmm. Yeah.
So the question always becomes like, so how do you become less attached? And one thing that I forgot, I was going to ask you something, but okay, let me just put it this way. I like talking to you. I think you are in a position where you're ready for like the forget it stage. I don't know if you heard me talk about this, but set it and forget it. Like set it is where you have to understand why you have trouble sleeping and how sleep works, etc.
Hmm.
And when you do that, then you're ready for the next step, which is like really trying to like, okay, now I'm going to do things I enjoy in life, and like going that direction.
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, because what I'm hearing, like, my question to you, I guess, becomes, how do you feel during the day? Like, do you find that you're able to do things you enjoy, etc.? Do you think you could go more in that direction?
I think the thing that's kept me having a difficult time with that is I have a lot. I think it's more the anxiety and the kind of depression associated with it. Not necessarily that I'm depressed, but more like I'm kind of, it's a depressing topic in that, like, I find it's like it looms over me, and then it's like almost it becomes like uh, a really tough reaction to break, to like maybe watch some of your videos or kind of look into something that you find comfort in. So it's like I know intellectually that like I should just kind of let go and move, and I know that I've made enough progress to kind of do that. But I find it's like my anxiety, because I've always been a pretty highly anxious person,
Mm, mm.
and now most of my anxiety is like really on this topic, and that it becomes very hard to do something or enjoy doing something that yeah, that kind of goes against my nervous kind of feelings, and it just makes me feel really like icky, kind of. I don't know how to explain it, and it's like I'll break out of that for a while, like I find when I texted you about this, I think it was what, like maybe 2 weeks ago, I was in a pretty great place, to be honest. Like I wasn't really focusing on this. I was doing a lot of other stuff, so it was really great. And even I would have like a bad night, and I'm like, oh, I know it's just kind of one of those things, and it would jump back. But then I have a couple, maybe you have a couple, like you just have a bad week overall, and it just kind of really pulls you back in that direction. It's hard to get out of that cycle.
Absolutely. In fact, I remember, I think the first time you emailed me or sent me a message, it was actually like you were doing well. And you said, you know what, I'm ready to let go of this whole thing. I
Yeah.
just have a few questions.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like that's the thing every time. It's like I'll have great, like, yeah, like great sleeps for a while, and I'm feeling so good and stuff. And then it just really just goes backwards for a while. And I think a big part of it is the anxiety.
Mm.
It, yeah.
Yeah, I know you had prepared some questions, so I did want to answer those. But like, hearing everything you said,
Mhm.
I think there's like two paths forward that for someone like yourself, someone in your spot, I think there are two good paths forward.
Mhm.
One path forward would be to like, being like, okay, um, kind of trying what you have tried, but continue, but without any expectations, like being like, okay, I know everything. I just have to focus on the good, and I have no expectations. Um, I'm not going to be attached to it. If things are just the same in a month or 2 months, that's okay. And just like, I'm just going to enjoy my life and taking that path, the forget it path. And then the other path would be, okay, I've tried the forget it path, which is oftentimes, it's in a way it's easier, but
Mhm.
let's say you say, okay, I have to try that. It hasn't really worked for me. Then I would say, go down the thought work path, like really understand what, that, I don't know if you already looked at it, but that self-coaching model I have a playlist on, like
Yeah.
really go down the path of like understanding thought work and creating thought ladders and that path. I think that could also work really well.
Yeah. And I feel like I've honestly tried a bit of both, and yeah, I agree with you. I think it's just, I'm at that point where I kind of have to just work on it. But yeah, I feel like it's just because I'm a pretty naturally anxious person. I have a lot of maladaptive thoughts, which make
Mm-hmm,
me
mm-hmm.
tricky. And then the thoughts will be swayed really good, like I've said. But yeah, I think it's the problem is like it's hard to make them not there. You know what I mean? Like I don't
Yeah,
know,
100%.
to forget it. I'm sure they just slowly, eventually, kind of go away because it's just the more you just kind of keep moving forward, right? But it's just tricky when they're so kind of powerful in your brain.
Yeah, and hearing more of what you just said, I think the forget it path works really well if someone has had started having trouble sleeping for random reasons, don't have so much underlying anxiety or that kind of tendency
Hello?
towards anxiety. You still hear me?
Yeah, you just kind of came back in. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I was just saying that the forget it path works really great if somebody's had, I mean, even a lot of trouble sleeping, but there's not so much of that kind of underlying, maybe tendency towards being depressed, tendency towards
Oh, I'm
anxiety,
losing
etc.
you again a bit, Daniel.
Oh,
Um, yeah, sorry. Could be my internet, but let's just keep going. I'll let you know if it happens again. Sorry about that.
okay, absolutely. Um, we'll see. So yeah, I was saying that the forget it path, it works great for a lot for a lot of people. But if you have kind of a tendency towards being depressed or a tendency towards being anxious, then I think thought work is better, because then that gives you tools that you can apply for anything. Like you can use it for anything that comes up in your life. So I think that is really, really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I think so too.
And so yeah, I think let's with that said, let's I'm always here to answer questions about that, but I also know you had some specific questions that
Hello? Okay, you're back. Yeah, sorry. You cut out again, but you said questions, right?
yeah, let me know what questions you had prepared.
Yes. Okay, let me get some of those out. Okay, so a big thing is like I know I shouldn't have any expectations, but like when I think of like a normal to get to, like let's say, you have an idea that you will be sleeping well eventually in some capacity. Should my expectations be like to kind of go back to my ways of sleeping, you know what I mean? Or because like at the beginning, I think I had this expectation like, oh, I'm just going to be this kind of person that can now fall asleep really fast from CBTI, you know what I mean? And sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't, and I'm just wondering like should that be kind of what I'm looking for, or like like what should I feel good about? Because before I would feel fine about like the way it was, so that kind of confuses me a bit. Yeah.
That's a good question, and it's interesting. Somebody else told me that when she started working, I think with Martin, and she had this like in the beginning she was so set on like, now I'm gonna have like this perfect sleep, it's gonna be really good, she was all really motivated, but she realized that was not that helpful to her. But yes, so I heard that kind of thinking before, but here's my answer to that, is that I think your expectation should be that when you don't worry at all about sleep, when sleep is not on the radar at all, then you sleep, at, let's say, your baseline, and I think it's best to have the expectation that you should sleep like you did before, meaning it did take you a long time to fall asleep,
Mhm.
but you were completely fine with that. It was never a problem. And I
Yeah.
do think there is we all have like personalities, we are all wired at baseline in a little bit different way, which
Mhm.
doesn't mean that I think every single human being out there can have an amazing life experience, but we are all a little bit different. So some people do have that uh, uh, let's call it personality, where they are like super like relaxed, like super like nothing faces them, they're not worried about anything, and they tend to also be those people who like falls asleep very quickly. and some people, some of us are more, we think more, we are more prone to like pondering and whatnot, and it takes us longer to fall asleep, and that's all normal. So I think the best thing is like to think of it as like, in the past it took you a long time to fall asleep, but that was never a problem. It was, sleep wasn't on the radar, it was not an issue. So I think that is the goal. Like that's where you want to, that's where you will get to.
Okay. Okay. Um. So yeah. Another thing is like practically, how can I really like make myself let go during the day? Because that's the big thing. Is like I've always been kind of, I think, more of a problem solving type person, and now this has just become the grand problem. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
it's kind of like I know that I kind of do have to let go in some senses and kind of just focus on other parts of my life, but it's so hard to concentrate on other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are three ways. I think I think you have the kind of like, let's say, the competing problem path, which is where you're a problem solver. You have that kind of capacity to like really focus on something.
Mhm.
And so the first part would be like, find something else that you can really, really focus on, a huge problem, an undertaking, a challenge, something like that, that you can really, really problem solve with, and that will take up a bigger and bigger space and kind of crowds out the problem solving when it comes to insomnia. That's, let's say, option number one.
Mhm.
Option number B is mindfulness. That the practice of without judgment, just being in the present, and in doing that, not, and the important thing with mindfulness is, if you do anything with a specific purpose, let's say I'm going to start practicing mindfulness so that I no longer have trouble sleeping, well, that's not going to work. But if you can find pleasure in it, and you understand how you can just being mindful of an object or something you do without any judgment, any think about it, then you can start applying that to your thoughts too, etc. So mindfulness can be a good way. And
Mhm.
the third one is what we already talked about. The third one is thought work, because that is so powerful. You can always use thought work. So I think those are the three paths I can think of.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I think, yeah, those are definitely the wisest avenues. And I definitely do, like, I have obligations, of course, right? So I've been trying to just like focus on the tackling of those, that kind of thing,
Hmm.
as well as just like kind of working on my thoughts. Like, a big thing is just like challenging the bad ones that come, you know what I mean? And kind of thinking about why I feel that way. If I'm starting to feel anxious, I kind of try to like dig a little deeper and figure out what thoughts kind of driving that.
Exactly. I think that's a very good first step, like identifying the thoughts. And then, in classic CBTI, you like kind of challenge the thoughts, which works sometimes, but sometimes I think this, what I talk about in the self-coaching model, like deliberately working from a thought towards another thought is
Yeah,
is
like
is
trying to
not a good way.
change. Sure. I think that's, yeah, I've definitely been trying to do that. Just, trying to get some acceptance in that, like, bad nights are normal, that kind of thing. Like, um, just trying to find kind of comfort in them, and that like they're not the end of the world.
Hmm.
Because it's hard when you have this history. I think a lot of people have trouble with that, is like acknowledging that most people have bad nights. And even I had bad nights before, or I had nights where I'm really up late and I didn't really get that much sleep, but it just wasn't really a thing.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I want to share something that I've talked about a couple times lately, but it's kind of an insight for me, which is, it is very common that insomnia is almost like PTSD. You have like this particular trigger, and then you have a really, really challenging time where you sleep very, very little. And then even as you're sleeping better, then that still looms, that just hangs over like that could happen again. What if it happens again? How can I not make it happen again, etc.
Yeah.
And I think the key insight there is acceptance. Actually, it is like, what, that could happen again. I could have another stretch, or another night when I don't sleep at all, or another stretch of nights where I don't sleep at all. I could have the big one again, and I accept that.
Yeah.
You know, that is the way forward, really. It's kind of like even just saying it, for me, just saying it and making somebody think that is almost triggering in itself. But I think that is the way.
I think it is too. I think it's like, just I think a good tool I've used is like and you might find this beneficial, but I find like it's like when I have a bad night now, I always think about like that was rough, but I compare it to how it felt a few months ago. You know what I mean? Where there's a lot more of emotional kind of turmoil from it, which has been very helpful in that like it's like, okay, like, you can have a bad night now, but because you've resolved a lot of feelings, not all of them, but a lot of them, it feels a lot better than it used to in some capacities. So that's been kind of beneficial to me, is that like in kind of becoming a bit more with having a bad night from now and again.
Yeah, that's true. I think that, I mean, it's always good when you kind of positive and you see the progress, etc. But also, it could be a little bit like if you're like, okay, I'm 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 I didn't sleep so well last night, but it's not at all what it was like 2 months ago. Then it was terrible. Then you could also be playing a little bit of a, how should I put it? You could be reinforcing the thought that I don't want to go back to that.
Right.
You know?
But what I think you might be misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm not saying the sleep itself is like I'm saying the sleep itself like be equally as bad in terms of like quality, right? But I'm saying kind of the way I react to it is a lot better.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm saying like it's like the night, let's say this night is like equally as bad as a night 2 months ago. I'm kind of
Yes.
looking more like that, and it feels a lot better emotionally, It's like, yeah, I'm tired, and I probably was just as tired as I was then, but before I was so much more concerned. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fantastic. That's good. It's great.
Mhm. Um. Yeah, dude. I have a few more questions if you don't mind. But
No,
I
not
was
at
are
all.
we
Not at
finished?
all.
Okay, cool. Um, One thing I was wondering again, like I know I'm kind of at a point to let go. But I know you've talked a lot about the effortless sleep method book, that kind of thing. Do you think is that even worth me looking into, or should I kind of just not really get anything sleep related to?
I think for you, having talked to you quite a bit here, I don't think so. I honestly think that you don't need more information.
Yeah,
You know.
I think you're right. I feel like I know quite a bit. Well, yeah. So I was just wondering because I know like you spoke pretty highly, but I'm just wondering if there's anything that would be beneficial to me in that book. But
Yeah. I think it's a fantastic book. I think there are some problems with it too. I think there are some, the author is very. I think the story is that she had trouble sleeping for a very long time, and she kind of wished somebody had told her these things earlier. Like, so she's very much like, you have to do this, you cannot do that, you have to do that. Like, she's very kind of tough love in it.
yeah,
uh so I think it's a great book, but I think again, like, for you, like, I think, the idea is to let go. So I don't think you should buy another book. No.
definitely. Um, okay. One more thing is like has to do with the whole, the melatonin thing. Another kind of thing that happened is I let the melatonin run out like right before it got really bad, and I know it probably wasn't doing anything, but like, do you think like was the reason the kickback to that was probably mostly psychological, right? Because I just know like sometimes I wonder if like was getting on track easier because I was also still taking that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Because I kind of let go of that, but then I'm wondering like, did I think probably I developed a bit of an attachment to it. I don't know, really.
Yeah, my thinking of that is that I think melatonin has virtually zero impact on sleep.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't think so at all. I think there's a lot of confusion there. I think the narrative, I'm sure the narrative is that um, melatonin production is blocked by light. So therefore, when it gets darker outside, we produce melatonin, and melatonin is there to kind of make us sleep, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so many reasons I don't believe that at all. One is that if melatonin really made you sleep, then why doesn't it make anybody sleep? Like,
Yeah.
that's one of them. But more importantly here, I strongly question the whole narrative, because look at, you know, people who live in, I don't know, like northern Finland. Like it's completely dark half of the year. It's completely light half of the year, and they still sleep. They may sleep a little bit less or whatnot, but it doesn't have any big impact. Look at people who live in societies where there's no electric light, no artificial light, and it gets dark, let's say 6:30 one half of the year, and then a little bit later the other half of the year. But like, you would think that when it gets dark outside, they produce more melatonin and then they go to bed. But in fact, it's nothing to do with that. Like, people go to bed in those societies where there's no artificial light, people go to bed about like 6 hours before it's the coldest. So it's kind of regulated by temperature. So I honestly think that temperature and like practical aspects is what dictates when we humans go to bed, and like melatonin is probably just produced like 6-7 hours before that or something like that. But so I think melatonin, has, it's just like anything else. Like, people ask me, like, do you think GABA plays a role, or do you think, if I eat low fat or high sugar, everything plays a role. Like, if you eat buckwheat spaghetti or regular spaghetti, that one of them can maybe make you sleep 1 minute more or 2 minutes less. But does it really matter? Absolutely not.
Okay, yeah, that's what I kind of suspected, but I think it was more of a psychological thing, for sure.
Yeah, I think it always is. It's the same thing with the medications too. It's like, you have one person takes let's say melatonin or Benadryl or whatever it is, and they start sleeping more, and another person says, "No, it didn't do anything for me." Well, I think that's all because of the thought, and that goes back to that model I was, the playlist, the self-coaching model.
Yeah,
I think it's super important. Like, there's so many things with that model that's important, but at the heart of it, like, one thing that's more important, I think, than anything else is that emotions are produced by thoughts. Nothing else really produces emotions. So anxiety, depression, or fatigue, or what I'm talking about, I'm getting all mixed up here. I mean, like, anxiety, like happiness, anger, whatever emotion it is, it's driven by a thought. And so if somebody takes something, whatever it is, let's say they take Benadryl, and they're thinking in their mind that, oh, this is really going to help, then that thought produces, some calmness, and that calmness leads to more sleep. Versus another person thinks, I'm just taking this, but I don't think it's going to help. They in fact become more anxious, is not going to sleep at all. It's always the thought that produces, whatever result or outcome it is. And that's, and some people, they say then, well, even if it is the thought, isn't it okay then if I take melatonin and I know it's the thought that really helps, but I'm still going to take it? If somebody does that, that's okay, because they're completely unattached to it. But oftentimes, instead of that thought, the thought becomes, I can't sleep, but melatonin works. And that thought is not helpful at all, because the next time you have trouble sleeping, the thought becomes, I can't sleep, and now melatonin stopped working. So yeah, I think, I know I kind of went off on a tangent here, but I hope that made sense.
No, it totally does. Yeah, it totally does. So yeah, because I know you usually, you don't like push people to get off the medication, but you kind of want to inform them more that, like, it's not abnormal if it stops working for a bit, but you shouldn't like react to that type of thing.
Exactly. Like, sometimes I come across someone who's like, I've been taking I've been taking trazodone for 15 years and I sleep great. Then I don't feel any need to tell the person that, oh, it has nothing to do with the trazodone.
Yeah.
Because why rock the boat, right? But
sure.
I think if somebody starts having a little bit of trouble sleeping, then it's much more important to know that your trouble sleeping has nothing to do with that medication.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. Okay, I have one more question for you. Is that cool with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Because I asked you briefly about CBD, your opinion on it, not in terms of sleep, because I know, like I said, I kind of have an idea of all the stuff you just said just from videos and stuff, but I'm just like curious on your general opinion on it as a doctor, because I've been like, even before the sleep issues were kind of more on the radar, I've been thinking about it just for anxiety And I know there's not a lot of research on it, but there's a lot of like, I just like, there's so many stories of like how this like recovered anxiety or like helped heal it or did it for their dog. So like, I just don't understand. I mean, like, I don't understand it quite, but like anecdotally, it's helped so many people. So it kind of intrigues me.
Yeah. I think I want to answer in this way that anxiety is an emotion,
Hmm.
and the only thing that really changes our emotions are our thoughts.
Hmm.
So when it comes to, let's say, CBD or alcohol or medications or whatever it is, the if they have an impact on our emotions, it's because they change our thoughts.
Mm.
And if you use any of the above, and there's two ways they can change our emotions by changing our thoughts. And one of them is, if you, for example, you drink so much alcohol that you're just unable to, your brain is just unable to form a coherent thought, then if you were anxious, then that inability to form a coherent thought can kind of be dampened, if you will,
Yeah.
and you feel less anxious. And I think it's the same thing with CBD or medications. Though the other way you can change your thought is, of course, the belief in it. Like, I believe this will help. Your thought changes, your emotion changes. Um, so really, I think that is it. But again, I think the intent is all that matters. If
Mm.
someone if someone says, I have some alcohol, I have a glass of wine, and that makes me feel good, I feel relaxed and I enjoy that, is there a problem there? Absolutely not, because the intent is actually not to make themselves call. The intent is just pleasure. Perfect.
Right.
Versus somebody who says, I'm really anxious, so I'm gonna start drinking some wine. Then that's a super slippery slope, because it reinforces that anxiety is bad. You don't want anxiety; it becomes a bigger problem in your life, etc. So I think that applies to that.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So I get that question a lot, and like where I live, like CBD CBD is completely legal here in Oregon. So I think my thought is like, if somebody is like, I like to eat cookies, and I enjoy that. Perfect. I like CBD because I think that it's going to enrich my life. I think it's going to be. I look forward to it. Perfect. But again, anything done to kind of escape an emotion makes that emotion much bigger part of your life.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. I think that's all I have for you. Is there anything else you want to say? And also, just by the way, thank you so much for the time. This has been amazing. Like, I really
No,
appreciate
anytime, anytime, Luke. And it was really nice. I hope it was helpful. As and you already said it was, so I will just thank you for that. And stay in touch and let me know how things go. And we'll go from there.
it. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thank you
Thanks,
again.
man.